What kind of short straw did I get a chance to draw that I get to follow the presidential candidate? I don't know how this works.
Let's see. I don't know how many people keep asking me and they say, "Oh, you're interviewing Wes Moore." We ask him when he's running for president. So I have a feeling I'm interviewing two presidential candidates. I didn't say which year. Nobody said which year. I'm actually going to. I want to start. I did that on purpose. I know. I want to start where I ended with him on. We're talking about national service, just sort of as a bit of an intro. To talk about, this is primarily an education conversation. I might sneak in a little bit of politics at the end.
That's great.
But you've signed an early bill, a form of state service, I guess. But it's potentially a model for national service. Obviously, your background at the Robin Hood Foundation, being a military veteran, it makes a lot of sense. We got caught up in mandatory, not mandatory. But tell me your vision of what a national service program would look like. We know what Bill Clinton was trying to do, and it didn't quite take. It almost got there. It didn't quite take. What would you envision a national service program to look like if you could install it tomorrow?
I'd envision that it would look a whole lot like what we just did in Maryland. Mm-hmm. I think Maryland has just set a real national standard, national model as to how you can actually execute upon this. Where in my first day of office, we signed an executive order that created the Department of Service and Civic Innovation, which is really focusing on making sure that we have a consolidated way of being able to unify all the different service options and service platforms that we have in the state of Maryland. And one of the bills that I introduced in our legislative session that got passed bipartisan, by the way, as well, was Maryland is now the first state in this country to have a service year option for its high school graduates. And so the reason that we're really excited about this, so when a person graduates from high school, they can join the military, they can go to the workforce, they can go to college, they can go to trade school. Well, now in the state of Maryland, Maryland has another option. Their students can have a year of service, and they can choose however they want to do it. They can serve in the environment, they can serve in criminal justice reform, they can serve in early education, they can serve veterans, they can serve seniors. It's their choice. And we really did it for three reasons. One is I'm a big believer in experiential learning. And one of the challenges we have for young people is that they don't have an opportunity to learn what it is that they want to do. But yet when they either go into high school, when they go into college or they go into the workforce, we're asking them to jump into a field or jump into a major, when for many of them, they don't have any sense of context as to what it is that they want to do. And so I believe in experiential learning. This gives them a chance to have experiential learning. The second reason, it gives them a sense of financial footing, because it's a paid year of service for the students. At the end of it also, they receive a stipend that they can then use to whatever it is that they want to do. That's how you're actually opening up to everybody and not just having it for some who can afford it. But in addition to that, when life gets in the way for a lot of students, they have a bit of a financial buffer. And the third reason, it's because service is sticky, right? Those who serve together generally stay together. And I know I saw it on the campaign trail where I had people who I served with in Afghanistan. I was a member of the 82nd Airborne Division and led paratroopers in combat. And I had people who I served with in Afghanistan who were coming and door knocking on my behalf during the campaign. And many of them were not Marylanders. Many of them were not Democrats. But they were literally coming and knocking on doors and saying, let me tell you about the guy that I served with, right? Service is sticky, and service will save us. And so I believe that while Maryland is now the first state in this country to have a service year option for its high school graduates, I can guarantee you we will not be the last. And I think Maryland is going to really help to set the standard as to what that looks like and how other states can incorporate it. So then it turns into a larger national conversation.
Would you ever envision it being like Israel, where there's a mandatory sort of service to the country?
I don't think you need to do mandatory, because I think that I like the fact that you have students who have a variety of options. But I do know this. It's not a mandatory thing that Maryland is doing. Our biggest challenges, particularly early days, are going to be intentional capacity, because the demand is going to far outstrip the
Absolutely.
capacity.
Yeah.
And because we want to make sure that we're starting off we're starting off in a bold way, but in a controlled way. We're running a whole series of RCTs, and because I'm a data driven person, I want to make sure that we're doing this right. But the thing that we also know is that already from what we've seen, the demand from both the student side and also from the nonprofit partners, from the corporate and the business partners, from the unions and government agencies, the demand for that talent and the demand for that pipeline is already probably going to be our biggest challenge that we have in navigating the first years.
Are you going to have to, are you talking about vetting private sector organizations that may want to be housing these folks, right?
We are, for the partnerships and the placements that we have, this is not just for nonprofit organizations.
Yeah.
We have social enterprises, we have small businesses, we have large corporations who have said we want to be able to get involved. And we had a partnership from a large energy producer who's doing a lot of green energy work. And literally, when we were in the process of testifying and putting this on board, I had one of the partners who came up to me and said, "I just want to let you know, I'll take 200," because they have the same challenges when it comes to talent pipelines, where you have people, and I know it gets an education, but you have people who there's this disconnect between skill set and what people are looking for. And so they're like, if you can tell me that I can have an opportunity to work with students who are finishing up high school, who are going to receive a curriculum that's going to focus on things like financial literacy, financial education, all the things that all the students who are going to participate, that they'll receive, and you give them an opportunity to learn about my culture and participate, I will take as many of those students as you can give me.
Let me start why we're here, why you agreed to do this. 40 years ago, the Reagan administration put out a report about education saying we were a nation at risk. Our education system today, how would you assess it?
I think we're still a nation at risk because we have not figured out a way of connecting the ends with the means.
Okay. Tell me more.
So if you take a look at the state of Maryland, for example, right now, we have, we're now going on 3 straight months of historic unemployment, low unemployment levels in the state of Maryland. But here's the challenge. We still have 2 available jobs in the state for every single person filing for unemployment, right? And people say, well, how does that make sense? It makes sense because we actually have a dynamic economy.
Skills gap, right?
It's a skills gap. We have a dynamic economy, but we have a participation gap. So people who are not prepared for the type of economy. So if you look at our state, and I'm incredibly proud of the economy that's being built out within our state, but we are the home of NASA. We're the home of the Applied Physics Lab. We're the home of some of the top military installations in the country. We're the home of U.S. Cyber Command. We're the home of the NSA. We're the home, I think every acronym in the world exists in the state of Maryland. We have a truly dynamic economy within our state. We also know that we have private sector employers and also government agencies who are screaming at us about the type of skill sets that they are looking for, but we do not have an education system that's listening.
So what are you short on? Governor Hutchinson and I spent a lot of time talking about computer science.
Yep.
And, he talked about in Arkansas, he's now got a majority of high schools with computer science programs, but when he started, he didn't. What's the state of public high schools when it comes to computer science in Maryland?
So in computer science, we're actually doing better than we historically have done before. The legislature, actually about 9 years ago, passed a bill allowing increased computer science education and technology education within our high school systems. It's something that we're doing. It's something that we're doing better in. I think the challenge, though, that we continue to see is you're talking about specifically things like computer science. There's an evolution of computer science where the things and skill sets that were needed for computer science 9 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 2 years ago continue to evolve because it's such a rapidly evolving
Good luck
industry.
finding teachers that can keep up with that.
And that becomes one of the big challenges, right? And so when people look at the teacher shortage challenge that we have in the state of Maryland, and in fact one of the bills, we introduced 10 bills in our first legislative session. We went 10 for 10 on the bills.
You better, honeymoon period, right?
Yes.
You gotta do well in those first 3 months.
Well, and I tell you, I have to say real quick on the honeymoon period. I tell people I don't believe in the idea of a honeymoon period because people, and here's why. Because people talk about honeymoons, and part of the challenge is they say a honeymoon period works because at the beginning it's all fresh and it's all fun, it's all new, but at some point the partners start acting differently. right? And that's when the honeymoon wears off, when it's like, oh, I didn't know you acted like this all the time.
This is my 21st wedding anniversary today, by the way, so I can't be thinking that way. It's been nothing but tremendous.
But
Always
it's like,
a honeymoon.
But I think the reason that that I think we as an administration, as a team, just reject it is what we're showing people is this is just the new pace. This is just the way that we move. And the reason that I say we went 10 for 10 and we went 10 for 10, all bipartisan. We got Democrat and Republican votes on every single one of the bills that we introduced, and we worked at it.
You didn't need it, though.
We didn't need it, but you know what, though?
Why'd you do it? It's interesting. And I think it's an important, I mean, look, there's a part of me that wants every major initiative has to have, like, imagine if we had Supreme Court justices where you had to have 10 votes from the other party.
Yeah.
Mandatory, right? Things like this. So why'd you get bipartisan support? In Maryland, you didn't need it.
No, I can get anything I want passed just by getting Democrats. But that doesn't mean it's going to work. And if you're passing something that has no chance of actually impacting people's lives, then what are you doing there? Right? I mean, and we campaign this way where, and first I say, when we first were in this race, there were like 10 other people running on the Democratic side. And when we were campaigning, we literally campaigned everywhere, even like in deep red areas. And they're like, you know there are no votes there for you. And I'd say, well, yeah, first of all, it's the only place I know that I won't run into another person running for governor. But
your field was bigger than the current Republican president.
Yes, it was. And I was like, but the other thing is, too, is even when people would say, why are you here? There's not a lot of Democrats. And my point is, yeah, but there's a lot of Marylanders. And I plan on being their governor, too. So we should probably get to know each other. And so even though I knew that I can get our entire agenda passed with just Democrats, in order for this stuff to actually work, it means you're going to have to be able to not just get buy-in for votes, but buy-in for implementation. And the thing that I think we were able to see is that when we're able to lead with that, when we were able to go out all across the state and say, you know what, it is important that we got bills passed that did things like making Maryland now the first state in the country that has a pathway for free dental care and health care for all members of the National Guard. Because I just believe it's absurd that we're asking people to serve and they literally cannot get dental care, right? Or when I turned around and said, I believe that we need to get to a $15 minimum wage, and here's why. And when you go to places, they say, well, how did you get delegates in the Eastern Shore to vote for that? My answer was, I went to them, I went to their constituents, and I explained, you do understand that when we get to a $15 minimum wage and we address the fact that we have people who are literally working jobs, and in some cases multiple jobs, and still living below a poverty line, you do know that I'm talking about you all in Hagerstown and you all in Salisbury as much as I'm talking about West Baltimore, don't you? Look at the data. And that's when I think we were able to not just get them to convince them that we were right, because we focus on the data, by going directly to the people. I then were going to them and say, now you need to call your representatives and tell them they need to vote for my bill.
School choice.
Yeah.
There's different ways to describe school choice. When I was a kid, my parents made a choice to move to another part of the county. We couldn't afford to pick a school, so instead we found an apartment in a neighborhood that my parents thought was a better school. That was I've had the ability to decide in a different way what school my kids can go to.
Yep.
Every parent wants choice.
Yes.
Right. So it's where are you on school choice, and how do you, if you are for it, how do you implement it, and what do you do with the failing schools?
Yeah. I'm for the fact that we still do not have enough real accountability for schools, that we allow for some of these schools to exist, and in some cases that we're literally talking about legacies and generations of dropout factories, and we still have just done nothing about it, and we just simply oftentimes think that the conversation is exclusively about funding, and it's not, right? It's accountability. And I know if you look at what we placed out in our first budget, we made record investments when it came to our public school system. We ended up making record investments of over about $8.8 billion of a budget went towards public school education alone. But it wasn't just about the funding. We also had record levels of incentive and accountability measures that then placed with all those various schools. We look at things like where if we say we're going to invest in the public school system, and I know oftentimes that means things like, well, where are things like charter schools following to a conversation with that. My answer is I believe in investing in public schools, and charter schools are public schools. I believe that if you have high quality schools, they need to be supported and they need to be scaled.
Would you expand the charter school program? You're open to expanding more charter schools?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm for, you show me public schools that work, and I will show you a public school that I'm going to fund and I'm going to support, period.
What do you do with a failing public school? Sometimes it seems like it shouldn't be this, like, you go through whatever the worst school is, figure out that school should be improved that year, and if you can't improve it in a year, then you got to think about something else. But how do you fix a failing school?
Well, I think the one is we don't spend enough time actually being able to identify why schools work, right? And if we actually could really begin to disaggregate why schools are working, then we wouldn't have to continue having conversations about why there's so many failing schools, because the answer would be very clear to us. If you think about...
It's a weird problem, right? You watch, I see this with teacher friends of mine who apply to schools where they think the parents really want their kids to learn.
True.
So they're actually, and so you're thinking, yeah, but you're a really good teacher. I actually could use you.
Yeah.
Where, hey, this parent's working 3 jobs. They haven't had time to focus on their kid. Maybe they would in a perfect world and can't.
Yeah.
And they need you. Sometimes the good teachers, this is a bad school, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to a better school.
And I think that for a lot of those teachers, and sometimes we do get it confused where we think that the exclusive thing that teachers are looking for is simply about salary and benefits. It's actually not only not true, it's disrespectful, because it's also just about, tell me about the work environment.
Right.
Tell me about the climate that I'm teaching in. Tell me about the ability to work in a place that I feel supported. One of the reasons before I ran for governor, I ran one of the largest poverty fighting organizations in the country. We ended up supporting, I think, over 70 community schools, for example. And I'm a big believer in community schools. And people say, well,
what does that mean when you say community schools?
So community schools it's schools where it's not just about the educational framework, what happens there. It's also making sure that the students there have dental care and eye care. And it's very difficult to say, well, why isn't that child
Turn the school into a community center?
It's exactly all the different facets. And by the way, it's not just for the child. It also becomes for the parents and the families, because the best way you want to help a child, make sure their parent or guardian is supported. The best way you want to help a parent is make sure their child is taken care of. So it's creating an entire ecosystem. The beautiful thing, and one of the things I love about community schools, it's not just the fact that it's helping to address some of these other measurements and challenges that you see in a lot of communities. It's the results oftentimes are better. The academic results are better. And so I think that the way we address the fact that we have these type of education gaps is not simply by saying we're going to take the old framework and put more capital into it. How are we changing the entire framework? By being able to address the other core fundamental issues that children and families are continuing to deal with when you know that in a neighborhood where one of the only salvations you have is that school. One of the only safe places you have is that school. How do we then make that school a larger ecosystem of support and advancement and excellence than just simply a place that serves as almost a glorified daycare center?
Would you support vouchers to private schools?
No. And here, let me tell you why.
Okay.
I don't think that the answer to addressing the larger education challenge is by deciding which kids can escape it. I think that if we're going to be serious about actually creating a larger pathway for our education system to become a real funnel and breeding ground for economic success, if we're going to be serious about saying that we're going to be a society that's going to focus on work, wages, and wealth for all and not just some, the answer cannot be, well, let me pick and identify which kids are going to be the ones who are going to do well. And again, and I'm very clear, I'm not saying that I'm against private schools or parochial schools or anything like that. And listen, I'm a kid. I was sent away to military school when I was 13 years old. So not only would I be a hypocrite, I'd also be a very different person if I didn't get yanked away. And people said, was it a choice? I was like, it obviously was not a choice when I was 13
You didn't have
years
school
old.
choice, yeah.
I didn't have school choice when I was 13 years old. That was a pretty mandatory
I remind
thing.
my own kids of that. This is not a choice.
That was not a choice.
It's not a democracy in my house.
That's right.
Yeah.
But what I am talking about is how are we using public dollars? How are we using taxpayer dollars? And I believe deeply that it is of a moral obligation for us that every single taxpayer dollar has got to be scrutinized and seen through a lens of how is it going to help and advance the largest amount of people as possible.
Let's talk about the compact on free education. We basically had a 20th century compact with the public that said, we're going to provide you access to education through high school.
Yeah.
100%. Wherever you go, you enroll. Yep, we take you.
Yep.
I think if you believe the rhetoric of the 80s and 90s, we were probably going to add 13th and 14th grade at some point, or 2 years of community college, however you wanted to talk about that. That hasn't happened.
No.
Should it? What should be the new contract that the government makes with the public on educational opportunities?
So, I mean, I believe things like that we're doing around the service year option and that kind of thing. I think these are going to be powerful tools in order to help us to honor the tradition of being able to identify what is it that students want to do and how do we then help them do it. I also don't know, though, if part of the contract is saying that, oh, well, we also need to say that we're going to pay for college for every single student, because I don't think every student needs to go to college. I think one of the other big things one of the other challenges we've had is that, listen, I am very proud of the fact that I'm governor of a state that has some of the best four institutions in America, right? We are literally the home of everything from the University of Maryland College Park. We're the home of Johns Hopkins University and Towson and four of the top HBCUs in America. I mean, like, we have some tremendous four-year colleges in the state of Maryland. And I still believe we need to end this lie that every single one of our children need to attend one of them. Right? It's just not true. God bless four-year institutions who 30 and 40 years ago.
But let's talk about the skills gap. You talked about the skills issue. Let's say I'm 33 years old, have a high school diploma.
Yep.
I'm looking for a better job. Should I get access to a 1 year of technical training that the government pays for?
I think that's the kind of investment that has a significant societal ROI, right? And I think the data is very clear on that. That things like job retraining, job reskilling programs, things like we supported when I was running Robinhood. We supported a platform called NEW, which stands for Non-Traditional Employment for Women, which was about how are we actually creating skill sets and pathways for women to enter into occupations that historically have been non-traditional. Things like the building trades and that type of thing. The thing that we saw when you're investing in things like NEW, or the things that we saw when you invested in things like job reskilling platforms, is you could have individual ROI for that individual. At NEW, it went from taking an average salary of $27,000 to $113,000, right? That's a significant ROI. And so for things like that, I think you can say, what are we doing to use government and taxpayer capital? Because the societal ROI is so significant. I'm not sure of the answer to saying, okay, well, let's just make every four-year college free for every single student. I don't think you're going to generate the kind of ROI, because I think what you're doing is you're neglecting the type of evolutions that we're seeing within the workforce. Because so many things that I'm hearing from CEOs, that we're hearing from business leaders, is we're not necessarily looking for another PhD. Or I'm not looking for someone who is going to be the next, no offense to English graduate, next English graduate from X university. I'm looking for someone that has these three tangible skill sets. If I can teach that without a person also taking on $70,000 or $170,000 of debt, then I'm all for it. And so I think that I think that's it's another example of saying that we made a compact. So therefore, what we should do is this: start working on how do we fund higher education. It's another example of, I think we're not being intellectually honest enough about what is the challenge that we're trying to face with the resources that we have. What's the closest way for us to get there, and what's the best way for us to actually determine the societal return on that investment?
All right, I'm under 5 minutes. Softish political stuff for you. Similar question I asked Governor Hutchinson. What's the number one thing that harms our politics today? You got to pick one.
One?
No, number one.
I mean, listen, I'm really proud of what we've been able to get done in the state of Maryland thus far in just 5 months. I mean, we're moving at a very fast clip in the state of Maryland that we're excited about, in a bipartisan clip. But you know what I had to spend 2 hours doing yesterday? Talking about what happens to the state if we hit a debt ceiling. I mean, you got to be kidding me. right? I mean, it's an important thing to do because that's where we are, but it's absurd that we're literally having a debate whether or not we want to pay our bills. You know who doesn't get to do that? Governors. I can't tell the people of my state, you know what? I know we have certain things we have to, I know I should balance a budget. But can we talk about that for a second? I can't do that. And so the fact that I'm now spending time out of my day being briefed by all of my cabinet secretaries about here are the things that you're going to have to do, here are the things that you have to prepare for, here are the cuts that you have to make. Hey, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, here are all the veterans who now are not going to get service if we hit a debt ceiling. That is, it's so poisonous because it has such human implications that I think people are completely forgetting about.
Let's take the debt ceiling out of the conversation.
You asked for one.
No.
You asked for
But
one.
actually, no. I want to dive because I'm very curious because I don't ask this question enough sometimes publicly because it's never front and center. Which is, what's your plan to deal with the national debt? How do you begin? And I think there's some people who think, hey, we don't have to worry about it. And I think it's clear whatever the number we thought was bad is not as bad, whatever, however it is. And we keep, turns out we can handle this. Turns out we can handle this. But what's a fair way to tackle the debt? It does seem like something we ought to eventually deal with.
Yeah, but honestly, I think it's something that governors actually are doing.
Yeah, it's easy when you have federal dollars to help you balance your budget. No offense, Governor.
No.
You get a lot. You have to mandatory. You all have 45 of the states, right? I get it.
That's right.
But at the end of the day, the federal government does help you balance that budget sometimes. Ask Gavin Newsom about that surplus he's got.
Yeah.
It's thanks to the feds.
But I still think there's a level of discipline that we all have to approach our work. I was very clear to the people of our state.
So how do you create the discipline? I get that.
Yeah.
How do you create a discipline in the federal level?
Well, I think the example that we can show can also show that, right? So for example, if you take a look at our first budget, I said to the people of Maryland that we are going to have a budget that is going to be bold and ambitious, but is also not going to be reckless, right? And so, especially because I knew the conditions that were creating any forms of surplus that we had on board, that whether it was historic movements within the market, particularly within equities, whether it was a historic injection of capital that came from the federal government, or whether it was a historic level of vacancies, where in the state of Maryland we have about 10,000 vacancies of state government, about 6,500 vacancies within the executive branch alone. And I told the people of our state in the first days, all three of those things, do not anticipate any of those things being real a year from now, right? So here is the budget that I'm proposing that deals with all of it. So we said we can make investments in our HBCUs and our institutions of higher education, our K-12. We can get things like service option done. But by the way, we also have $200 million of tax cuts inside of there and giving your younger veterans the largest tax cut in a generation. That we said we can have bold ambitions and talk about how this is going to be the most aggressive push against child poverty and doing things like the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit that the state has ever seen. That we can say we can have bold aspirations in terms of our budget, yet at the same time still have 10% in our rainy day fund. So I think the thing that we are doing is we're trying to show that discipline by example matters. And as we talk about how can we be bold as a society, yet at the same time understand restraints that you have economically, that it's not a choice, it's a false choice. You actually can and you should be able to do both.
All right, last question. Joe Biden said he viewed himself as a transitional figure in the Democratic Party. There isn't a lot of enthusiasm out there for him. The enthusiasm is negative enthusiasm with Trump. How do you deal with that if you're Joe Biden? How do you defend it? And what do you say to a voter that says, why can't we have more candidates? Why can't we have more choices? Why am I stuck with this?
Yeah. I tell people why I'm excited to see another 4 years. And the reason that I'm excited and the reason that I will go out and campaign for the president is I know that just for the state of Maryland, that we've been able to see upwards of $1.9 billion of investment that's coming to the state of Maryland alone that's focusing on things like transportation infrastructure, roads and bridges, mass transit, projects that have been long overdue, but now because we have this unique moment and stars are aligning, we're going to get it done. I tell people that right now the state of Maryland has historic and record unemployment, and that is also both because of financial stewardship, but then it's also because of the fact that in my first 2 weeks of office, the president was in Baltimore, where we made a joint announcement about the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, which is going to increase transit going from Baltimore into Washington, D.C. By the way, that project alone is going to be responsible for about 30,000 jobs. 30,000 jobs, one project. So the reason that I'm excited to go out there and campaign for him is I say, I've got the partner that I need in Washington, D.C.
Right. Do you understand, though, why some voters feel this way?
I think it's important for voters to be able to understand what's happening within our society, the progress and the momentum that we've been able to see for the past 2 years, to never forget what things were like 2 years ago, where, listen, President Biden literally came in on the heels of an attempted coup. President Biden came in when we were still ravaging from a global pandemic. And if you look at the fact that we've had essentially more job growth over 2 years than any other presidency has had in 4, the thing that I would just ask people as they're getting ready to, cast their ballot and cast their vote is let's not forget the progress that we are seeing within our states. Let's not forget that part of the reason that we have that progress is we actually have a partner in Washington.
Westmore.